Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are going to be going over Unit 4, Lesson 4, which is all about groundwater depletion. Now, yesterday's lesson was all about groundwater. Where does it come from? How does it get into the ground? Where does it go? What's the difference between a confined and an unconfined aquifer? So if for some reason you did not do that lesson, or you're confused about anything at all, please go back and review that because today's lesson ties into groundwater, and if we don't know what groundwater is, we'll be a little bit confused. So today we are continuing our conversation about groundwater, but we're talking about groundwater depletion. Now, if something is depleted, it means the levels are lowered or it disappears. So we're going to talk about the factors that can affect our groundwater. So, groundwater supplies many of the hydrologic needs of people everywhere. So, just the needs that we have for water. So, in agriculture, running our dishwasher, our washing machines, our showers and bathtubs, our toilets, the water that we use is hydrologic need. So when we talk about groundwater depletion, that's just the long-term water level declines caused by continuous groundwater pumping. So we do pump water out of the ground. That's where we get our fresh water for our hydrologic needs. And the more people that we have in certain areas, the more water that we have to pump out. And sometimes we pump too much and it creates issues. So the volume of the groundwater storage is decreasing in many areas of the United States. So there are some consequences of groundwater depletion. Number one, wells can dry up, and wells are what we use to pump the water up. If you pump a well and you over pump it and the water table dips below where the well is dug, you won't be able to bring any more water up and you won't be able to use it. We can also see a reduction of water in streams and lakes. You can see a deterioration in water quality. Also increased pumping costs and something called land subsidence, which we'll talk about. There are some more consequences on this website, which is linked here in your presentation if you want to take a look or if you need elaboration on any of those things. So one specific consequence of groundwater depletion is at an aquifer that's in the Midwest. It's called the Ogallala Aquifer. It's a little bit hard to say, but it's located in the Great Plains and it services a lot of the farmland out in this area. And because it's so big and services such a big area, it's being overpumped. So the water is being withdrawn faster than the aquifer can be recharged. And so that is going to result in reductions in its volume. So basically, the people in the Midwest, they are pumping way too much water out of this aquifer. And if the levels get too low, they'll run out of water because it won't be available for them any longer. And this is a video on the Ogallala Aquifer. I'm not going to play it in this presentation, but as you guys are doing your notes, go ahead and take the time to watch it before you move on. So one big thing that will happen if there's overpumping is something called saltwater intrusion. And we absolutely positively need to know about saltwater intrusion. So saltwater intrusion happens when groundwater is over extracted in coastal areas and water from the ocean can intrude into inland aquifers. So this only happens in coastal areas. So for North Carolina, think like Wilmington, Southport. If you guys have ever been to Oak Island, it's a great place. I highly recommend it. But people who live there that rely on wells, if a well is over pumped, then the salt water can actually be pulled into the well and contaminate it. We cannot drink salt water. It will make us very sick. So if a well gets contaminated with salt water, it will be undrinkable. Okay, so normally this doesn't really happen because the fresh water is flowing towards the ocean. And as the fresh water is flowing, it kind of pushes that salt water back. But if you over pump a well, it will draw the salt water up and it will be affected. It will affect that fresh water. So this is what it looks like, and we do need to be aware of what's happening here. So you should be able to look at a diagram and know that saltwater intrusion is happening. So here's your water table. Remember with your zone of saturation. This light blue here is going to be your fresh water, And then this kind of speckled blue is going to be your salt water. So the speckles are representing the salt that's in the ocean. So here we have a well that's being pumped, and normally this fresh water would be pushing this salt water back. So the ocean water normally gets pushed back and you don't have a mix. But this particular well is being overpumped, and we're seeing something called the cone of depression. Okay, so this cone of depression is basically, if we take a look, a depression is just a dip. So this fresh water is dipping down because it's being overpumped. And because it's being pumped so fast, this fresh water is not being able to push back the salt water. So the salt water is being pumped into the well and contaminating the well. Okay, so again, this occurs in areas along the coast. So you have to be near salt water. This could not occur in our area. We live in the Piedmont because we're not close enough to the ocean. It's not going to happen in the mountains either because we're not near a source of salt water. So this only happens in coastal areas. Okay. And again, here's a video on saltwater intrusion that I highly recommend as you're going through and you're filling in your notes, you pause and watch. So another consequence of groundwater depletion is something called land subsidence. So as aquifers lose water, so they're overpumped, they become less able to support the overlying land, and basically they will just become sinkholes. So the land gets very unstable. As we overpump, that soil will become loosened and you can get big holes in the ground. So here's an example on pavement. This looks like it was in a parking lot. And then this is an actual building that the land underneath it, because the aquifer has been overpumped, it has started to sink into the ground. So subsidence is just a hole forming in the ground from the loosening and the loss of integrity of that soil. So our groundwater also supplies our bottled water. This is one of the reasons why we deplete so much groundwater, because there is a high demand for bottled water because people think it's superior, or people live in an area that maybe they don't have access to clean water, so it's better for them to buy bottled water. But it is an issue because it has a lot of ecological impacts, because that plastic is not biodegradable, meaning that it will not break down into landfills. So if you're tossing your water bottles into a trash can instead of recycling them, it can do a lot of environmental damage. So we're over pumping to supply the demand for water bottles, and it's also creating issues in our environment because it's not biodegradable. And I believe that is the end of this slideshow. So the big things is we need to know what's happening with saltwater intrusion and land subsidence, and we need to know the consequences of groundwater depletion. Because remember, we depend on groundwater for all of our water needs, and if we deplete all of our groundwater, we're going to be in a really bad situation. So make sure that your notes are filled in, and if you have any questions about this lesson or any of the other lessons in this unit, please be sure to let me know. Have a great day, and I will see you guys in our next one. Bye, guys.